This lesson refers to the types of schools and the different types of education that you can get within the education system. Best way to watch this lesson is to watch the video, pause it to complete the work. Although there are other videos in the lesson, you'll need to pause this lesson and then go back into the PowerPoint to watch those. In order to evaluate the different types of school and education, we'll be referring to the functions of education that you learned in a previous lesson. So as a do now task, can you define some of these key terms? Secondary socialization, social cohesion, and role allocation. Pause the video and try and write down those definitions. So hopefully you got that secondary socialization is when we are socialized into the norms and values of society in school. Our primary socialization, where we learn basic manners and language, happens in our families. But in our families, we have particularistic standards. Every family has got a different standard, a different way of doing things. An example, in my family, one of our values was you had to eat all the food you were given. You were never allowed to eat any food on your plate. That's not a value they have in most families. So it's a particularistic standard, particular to my family. Secondary socialization at school, however, we have universal standards. It's the same for everybody. You've got to be on time, you've got to dress smartly, you've got to obey the teachers and the other staff. These are the values of society as a whole. Social cohesion refers to the values that bind different people together. In school, there are different social backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religions. But we all do group work together in class, we're all on the same teams together, we all have to respect one another and learn how not to offend one another, and that binds society together. That occurs in school. In your family, everyone might be the same as you, but in school you learn how to get on with people who are different. That's social cohesion. And then role allocation. This is the idea that school and the education system sorts us out so we end up with the right qualifications to do the right jobs. The people who get the best exam results, the hardest working, the smartest, they do the most important jobs for society. For example, those people who do best in science go on to become a doctor. So these are some of the purposes of education. In today's lesson, you'll learn to explain the different types of school and some alternatives to school as well, alternative forms of education, and learn to evaluate them. Which of these are best at achieving these functions? We'll start with some key terms that you need to know, different types of school, but actually you may well know some of these already. Can you match up the type of school with the definition? Pause the video and have a go at matching them up before we give you the answers. Okay, so these are the answers, and I'll give you another moment to pause the video so that you can write down these different definitions because you'll need them. A comprehensive school then is a publicly funded school. That's a school that gets its money from the government, and it doesn't select by ability. There are no entrance exams. A grammar school, on the other hand, does select by ability, so it does have entrance exams, but it also gets its money from the government. It's a publicly funded state school. In contrast, an independent school, sometimes called a private school or a public school, they're not funded by the government. Families pay to send their children there, and like a grammar school, they have entrance exams, they select by ability. A faith school, well, that could be funded by the government or it could be independent, but either way, there's a faith, like a Roman Catholic school, for example, or an Islamic school, and that faith is reflected in the curriculum and also in the admissions policy. You might be more likely to get a place in that school if you regularly practice that faith. Similarly, we can group schools by how they are managed. So these types of schools, a local authority school, it might also be a comprehensive school. What makes it a local authority school is that as well as getting its funding from the government, it's managed by the local council. The residents elect the local council, and the head teacher of the school is responsible to the local council. In our area, Conisbrough is an example of a local authority school. On the other hand, an academy also gets its money from the government, but it's managed by a trust, a business, or a voluntary group. So the Haberdashers' Asks Federation is a trust that manages the schools, and the head teacher of the academy is then responsible to the CEO of that trust. That's who their boss is. The free school, that again can be funded by the government, but is set up by parents, teachers, charities. It's a new school. So if a group of parents and a group of teachers want to set up their own school, that's called a free school. Okay, hopefully you've got all those written down. some questions to test whether you've understood what's been explained there. So pause the video after each question, give yourself a moment to write down the answer, then we'll go through the questions and then the answers. Number 1, which types of schools are funded by the government? List all the types of schools that get their money from the government. Number 2, which type of schools can select all or some of their pupils? 3, which types of schools can select all their students by ability? 4, which types of schools charge families a fee? 5, which type of school is Knights Academy? 6, which type of school can have a religious curriculum? And 7, which type of school would you like to go to and why? Pause for long enough that you can write some sentences about where you would prefer to go. Okay, let's run through the answers. Which schools are funded by the government? Comprehensive schools and grammar schools, both publicly funded, so they're funded by the government. Faith schools can be as well. And also, local authority schools, academies and free schools are also funded by the government. These tell you about the type of way the school is managed. But as well as being an academy, you might also be a grammar school. As well as being a comprehensive school, you might also be a local authority school. This tells you about how you select your students. This tells you about how your school is funded. And this tells you about how your school is managed. Which types of schools can select all or some of their students? Grammar and independent schools that select by ability, and faith schools can select some of their students according to faith. Even a comprehensive school can select some of its students, though not by ability or faith. For example, Knights Academy as a sports academy can select some students based on their sports aptitude. But there are no entrance exams in a comprehensive school, only in a grammar or an independent school. To select all of your students by ability then, only grammar and independent schools can do that. Charging a fee, that's independent schools. Knights Academy then, it's a comprehensive school because there's no entrance exams, it gets its money from the government, and it's an academy because it is managed by Haberdashers' Federation Trust. So our head teacher is responsible to the CEO of the trust. A religious curriculum, you'll find those in a faith school. And what type of school would you like to go to? I don't know. What type of school would you like to go to? I like working in a comprehensive school because we have students of all different backgrounds, different ethnicities and religions. Don't select by ability, so we have high ability and low ability. Altogether, I think it's good for social cohesion. Maybe you'd rather go to a faith school just with people of your faith. Maybe you'd rather go to a grammar school and just with people who are high ability. Maybe you'd rather a local authority school, so the principal of your academy was responsible to the local council, elected by the local residents. Totally up to you. What you do need to do, though, is be able to explain the different types. So here's an exam question for you. Describe one type of secondary school found in Britain and explain how it's different from one other type of secondary school. So describe, you should know that means you need to write a P paragraph and then explain a difference for the 4th mark. Pause the video and give yourself 4 minutes to complete this task. Okay, so to mark your work, if you've just named one type of school, that will get you 1 mark. If you're able to describe it using terms like state funded or select by ability, there's your 2nd mark. 3rd mark if you can give an example, and a 4th mark if you can explain the difference. A grammar school, which is different from an independent school because they are funded differently. One gets their money from the government, the other from families. A grammar school is different from a comprehensive school. They both get their money from the government, but one selects by ability and the other doesn't. So the difference will have got you the 4th mark. Let's think about then the differences in practice between state schools, whether they're grammar, comprehensive, free school, local authority, academies, and private schools or independent schools. Private schools get their money from families, not from the government. That means they've got more money. So what difference does that make? Come up with some ideas. Pause the video. Okay, I don't know what you've come up with. A lot of people suggest private schools can hire better teachers, so the quality of teaching is better. The evidence doesn't really support that. The quality of teaching is usually similar in both types of schools. The difference in pay isn't that much for different types of schools. And actually, private schools tend to be in areas that teachers can't afford to live, so they have to travel a long way to get to there. So maybe a lot of teachers would prefer working in a local school. But that extra money does mean private schools have lots of advantages. For example, although the teachers might not be any better, you can hire more of them. You can have smaller class sizes so students can get more support. You don't have to teach the national curriculum, you can teach your own ideas. Most importantly, you've got better facilities, so there's more that the school can offer. They can offer better sports facilities, better trips. They can hire more support staff. In a state school, the teachers might have to do duties after school, maybe make sure the students get on the buses safely. In a private school, they'll have separate security staff who can do that, so the teachers can focus on planning the next day's lessons and improve the quality of the education. Many people argue that private schools have a better academic culture. Because the students know their parents have paid for them to be there, then they take their work more seriously, their learning more seriously. The parents will ensure they do their homework because they've paid for them to have that homework. And when you're around other students who've got an academic culture, maybe that encourages you to have an academic culture too. And lastly, some people say private schools are a good thing because parents have a choice on how they want to spend their money. And if they want to spend their money on education, well, that's a good thing because education is a good thing. The more money spent educating the next generation, the better. So those are the basic advantages that private schools have. And perhaps because of those advantages, people from private schools get better job prospects. So only 7% of the country go to private schools. The other 93% go to state-funded schools. But what percentage of these top jobs do you think are made up by privately educated people? What percentage of our top politicians do you think went to a private school? I'll give you a hint. It's more than 7%. What about top doctors, journalists, judges, actors who've won BAFTAs, which is the top awards in the UK? And how about the top military jobs? Pause the video and have a guess what percentage of those top careers are filled by people who went to a private school. Okay, let's run through the answers then. Our top politicians, half of them went to a private school, even only 7% of the country do. That 7% produce half of our main politicians. They produce 61% of top doctors, 51% of journalists, 74% of judges, 42% of our most successful actors went to an independent school, maybe because they've got the most money to spend on drama facilities and that kind of thing. And 71% of the top jobs in the military are filled by people who went to an independent private school. And some people argue that creates problems, so they argue against private schools and think that they're a bad thing. There's inequality. Not everyone can afford to go there, so all of that fantastic education is only available to the wealthiest people in society. And that creates a divide in society. You may remember from last lesson, Marxists who believe the whole of the education system is designed to reproduce the social divide, so that the richest people are able to inherit the means of production from their families, and those from working class backgrounds are just trained to do manual, repetitive, low-paid jobs. And Marxists would definitely be against private schools. Children from the richest families getting all of these fantastic facilities and therefore able to go on and succeed. Children who can't afford to go there going to state schools where they are trained to do boring, repetitive tasks and therefore be exploited within the economy. It also means that powerful people care less about state school funding. Politicians, people who make these decisions, they're not as interested in how much money they give to government-funded schools because they never went to that type of school. Their children don't go to that type of school. They don't know what the challenges are, and they're not as invested in ensuring that they are good state-funded schools. It's for those reasons that Finland has banned all private schools. Everyone has to send their children to state-funded schools. And some people argue that's a good thing because it means those rich families are then invested in ensuring that those state schools are well funded. And also perhaps it means if everyone's got an equal chance because we're all at the same school, maybe there is a better meritocracy and you get better role allocation in Finland. Finland is world renowned for having one of the best education systems in the world. And some people argue it's because they've banned their private schools. On the other hand, other people would be very much against banning private schools, taking away the freedom of those parents to choose to spend money on their children's education. Maybe they just spend money on tutors and visits and things that their children would benefit from anyway. Maybe they don't send them to an expensive school with great sports facilities. They just send them to expensive sports clubs with great sports facilities. So maybe taking away that freedom and taking away that quality of education would be a very negative thing. What do you think? Pause the video and write a paragraph to explain your answer. Can you explain why Finland has banned all private schools? And can you explain what you think Britain should do? Pause the video, write a paragraph as your answer. This video is a TV show in which they do a school swap. Children from different schools, private versus state, go to the other person's school in order to experience what it's like. I'm not going to play that video for you now, because if I try and play the video within the video, then the sound quality isn't very good and the quality of the video is diminished. So the best thing for you to do is to come out of this video, go back into the PowerPoint itself and play this video. Or if you want, you could carry on working through the questions and play this video later. But it's a really great way of demonstrating to you everything we've been discussing in today's lesson. We're now going to move on to some exam questions. Identify and explain one disadvantage of independent schools, and identify and explain one advantage of comprehensive schools. 2 questions, each is worth 4 marks. Pause the video and give yourself 8 minutes to complete those questions. Okay, so when it comes to marking your work, identifying one disadvantage, perhaps the fact that they disproportionately mean children from those schools end up in higher positions in our society, that would get your mark. Being able to explain it and being able to give an example, there's a 2nd and 3rd mark. And the 4th mark, can you explain why it's a disadvantage? Maybe you can link it to the functions of education. Say it's not good for social cohesion if people go to different types of schools, one for the rich and one for everybody else. Maybe it's not good for role allocation if the students who might be the best at science don't get the highest marks in science because they don't go to as good school, and therefore they're less likely to end up as doctors when actually they were better at science. I'd rather have had them operating on me than someone who wasn't quite as good but got high marks because he went to such a good school. Similarly, for explaining the advantage of comprehensive schools, 1 mark if you can identify them. Okay, well, everyone gets to go to school together, so that's good for meritocracy, equal chances. Can you explain it, give an example, and link it to one of the functions like social cohesion or role allocation for your final mark? If you want to pause the video again and then have another go at those questions, then do so to see if you can maximise the amount of marks that you get. Moving on, it's not just different types of schools. There are alternatives to having a formal school education at all. Deschooling is the idea that schools should be abolished and replaced by an informal curriculum. That is a key term that you need to know, so make sure you've written that down. The idea schools should be abolished and replaced by an informal curriculum. Pause the video to help you to write it down. And why? Well, some people argue that school ruins creativity and doesn't suit everybody. Can you think of some examples? How does school ruin creativity? Forces you to use certain methods. The teacher models it for you and we follow that method. Forces you into a routine, arriving at a certain time, lining up in a certain way, following a timetable. And individuality, well, it's wrong according to schools. We've all got to wear the same uniform. You can't dye your hair different colours. You've got to use your coloured pens to each one to refer to a specific thing you're marking or the teacher's marking. Where's the creativity in that? Can't use them to colour over our books, can we? No, no, no. And maybe it doesn't suit everybody, this type of education. Maybe some people are just not very good at sitting still for an hour at a time, and that's why they don't succeed in school. It's not because they're not clever. Maybe they've got talents in other areas. Why do we prioritise English and maths? Maybe you're just really good in other areas. Maybe you've got particular education needs and the school just can't satisfy them. Whereas if you had a different type of education, maybe you would succeed. So those are the reasons why some people argue that home education is better. That's when parents take full responsibility for educating their children and remove them from school. Pause the video so that you can copy the definition. What are the reasons someone might home educate their child? I want you to think in terms of the functions of education. Can you have social cohesion, learning how to bind everyone together if you're not in school? Can you have role allocation and learn specialist skills for work if you're not in school, just learn from your parents? Do you learn the values of society, those universal standards, if you're taught by your parents who are only going to teach you their values and their standards? On the other hand, maybe there are some advantages for not being in school. Again, there's a video here. I'm not going to play it to you because watching a video within a video has very poor quality, especially on the sound. But perhaps pause this video so you can watch that one there. And there's two others here as well. Go into the PowerPoint and watch those, or watch them later if you prefer, but make sure you've seen them because they go into much greater depth than I'm going to here. And then you need to complete this task. Reasons why home education is good, reasons why home education is bad. And as I just suggested, can you link them to the functions of education? So pause this video and make sure you've written those two lists. Okay, perhaps you come up with some ideas of your own, maybe focusing on the fact that you can't learn from people who are different from you, or work in a team, work in a group with people different from you, learn to respect other cultures, learn that we're all of one society together if you're educated just in your family. Maybe you only learn what your parents' standards are. Maybe those are different from the standards of the rest of society. Maybe your parents aren't that fussed about punctuality. Some parents aren't, but then when you go to work, you do need to be punctual. Maybe you're not learning those specialist skills for work. But maybe you are. Maybe it's a good idea because you can actually learn what you need in the workplace rather than what you learn at school. Maybe there are things like how to fix your car, how to fix the appliances in your home that break. Learning that at home might be a better skill for the workplace than what you learn in school. Maybe you learn to get on with people better when you actually have the freedom to contribute to family discussions rather than only being allowed to talk when the teacher tells you to talk. Maybe you get to be more of a leader. Maybe there's loads of ways that your parents can design a creative education that works for you because they know you best. And maybe just the one-on-one attention will mean you get better, more help with your classwork, and therefore you do better. Perhaps if you're learning from home at the moment, you're starting to see some of the advantages and disadvantages of learning from home. But home education is not the only type of de-schooling. De-schooling is the belief traditional schools don't allow students to learn at their own pace and in their own way. One way of learning at your own pace and in your own way is homeschooling, but the other are what are called democratic or free schools. Again, the best thing for you to do is to come out of this video and watch these videos to teach you all about an example of a democratic or free school called Summerhill School. Again, there's another video here. And at Summerhill School, you only go to lessons if you want. So pause this video to go and watch those. So Summerhill School, you only go to lessons when you want to. It's democratic, so everybody is equal and everybody has a vote, teachers and students. The rules are made by voting between teachers and students, not by the teachers. And proponents of Summerhill believe it's got so many advantages. People go to lessons when they want to. They learn the value of education. They care about education. And so they learn that it's a good thing to go to lessons. There's no one in lessons who doesn't want to be there, so lessons are never disrupted by people behaving badly. People just leave if they don't want to be there. And so the only people there want to learn and lessons go really well. And then the quality of those lessons encourages other people to come back. And the rules, well, the rules are seen as fair because everyone votes on them. And to be honest, they're not only softer at Summerhill, in fact, sometimes they're stricter because the students want strict rules in the classrooms because they want those lessons to go well. They want to succeed. And people who are misbehaving aren't told off by the authority, the teacher, and then complain about them. It's their peers who say to them, look, please, can you stop doing this because it's affecting everybody else and we don't like it. And maybe that's much better for socializing people to get along with each other achieving social cohesion than having everything run by the teachers who say, do this because we're the teachers and we tell you. So many people think Summerhill has advantages. On the other hand, you might wonder to yourself, would you really do your best if your teachers weren't there pushing you, making you do your work, making you learn? You might think and reflect on your experience learning from home. Without someone to make me do my learning, do I actually achieve as well? And do I actually get the grades that I want? Okay, a couple more exam questions for you. Describe what is meant by deschooling. 3 marks, so we need the definition, some key terms in the explanation plus an example, and one advantage of home education for 4 marks. Again, identify it, explain it, and can you explain why it's an advantage by linking it to one of the functions of education? There's your 4th mark. Pause the video, give yourself 7 minutes to complete these questions. Okay, so to mark your work, 3 marks, 1 for knowing the definition, 1 for the explanation, 1 for the example, and 4 marks, 1 for naming an advantage, 1 for describing it, a 3rd for an example, and a 4th for linking it to one of the functions of education. So let's debate. What are the advantages and disadvantages? I've discussed some of them, but as we've been doing so, as you've been watching the videos, you should have loads more. Write them down in a table, the advantages and disadvantages of the different types of schooling. Pause the video to complete that task. You might have loads of different ideas then. The advantages of having a curriculum delivered by an experienced specialist teacher, the advantages of balancing your time, the right amount of stuff on each subject to do the best in your exams, versus the freedom of homeschooling and a free school. Maybe the free school also gives you a specialist teacher, maybe the homeschool doesn't, but maybe they have advantages of their own, that you get to learn at your own pace. It can be creative. Maybe in homeschooling it can be specifically tailored to what's best for you, and you don't get that at a traditional school. Everyone has to do the same thing. Everyone has to be herded around and line up all the time. You spend as much time being herded about and lining up as you do learning, perhaps. Reflect on your own experience learning from home and learning in school, and have your own list of advantages and disadvantages. Okay, a couple more exam questions for you to try. Identify and describe an alternative to formal education. Okay, so 3 marks there for either describing homeschooling or describing a democratic school. And a 4th mark, state how you could investigate it using non-participant observation. So you've got to remember what this is and be able to link it to the example. Question 2, identify and describe an alternative to formal education and state how to investigate it. It's the same, isn't it? So I'd like you to pick a different example, use deschooling for one, use homeschooling for one, and use a democratic school like Summerhill for the other. And this time a participant observation. Explain how you could take part in the school and what that would help you with your investigation for your 4th mark. Pause the video, give yourself 8 minutes to complete those 2 questions. Okay, marking it, 3 marks for your P paragraph describing the 2 types of education. The 4th mark, well, did you remember that a non-participant observation means you're going to be taking notes in pre-prepared categories on what you see, where you're able to give an example of what you might observe students doing. And for this one, participant, what might you have joined in with? Could you have joined in with the lesson or making rules in a free school like Summerhill? Okay, an extension task for you. Would nights work as a democratic school? If we said all lessons were voluntary, if we said all rules were equally voted on by teachers and students, would that work? Why or why not? And imagine Dr. Bennett is considering it. Write her a letter giving your view either for or against. Pause the video to complete that task. Okay, I'd be really interested in seeing your letters. She's not considering it, so maybe don't send Dr. Bennett your letters, but perhaps you could send them to the sociology department, and if there's any good enough, we could pass them on. So, are alternatives better than formal schools? Well, one advantage of being in a formal school is we could have a debate within class, and you'd have people to argue with about what you think is better. Maybe find some of your peers who study sociology, or just explain this to other people in your family. I'm sure your parents have got views about homeschooling, especially if you've been learning from home recently. Would they like to send you to Summerhill? Are they very happy they send you to a formal school? Discuss it with anyone you can, and then you need to answer this essay question. discuss how far alternatives to formal school are more effective at educating young people. So you might have firstly homeschooling, secondly democratic schools. You need to be able to explain them, but in terms of evaluating which is more effective, you should be linking that back to the functions of education: social cohesion, role allocation, secondary socialization, learning the core values of society, learning the specialist skills you need to prepare you for work. Which one does it better? Maybe firstly and secondly, you argue that deschooling is better for some functions, but on the other hand, you think formal schooling is better for other functions, and then write your conclusion. Pause the video to complete that task. Okay, if you've written a good essay, then you should have explained the different types of schools, but also evaluated which ones best achieve the functions of education. If you have, then you're well on your way to achieving a grade 7 in sociology, and you've successfully learnt this topic. Well done.